I am recording now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Dole. I am currently the Policy Director for Parole, Illinois. I would like to address the issue of carve-outs and argue against them. By carve-outs, I mean categorical exclusions based on crime categories or date of crime written into ameliorative legislation. People who argue for carve-outs use dehumanizing and often racist soundbites and demonstrate their complete ignorance of Illinois sentencing laws. Carve-outs ignore the status quo and can only be applied unjustly. They especially hurt the innocent. It is no secret that due to corrupt police and prosecutors, there are a great number of innocent people in prison. While some may miraculously find the resources to prove their innocence, most do not. Carve-outs are usually aimed at the exact same crime categories, murders and sex offenses, that we seem hell-bent on locking up innocent people for. In Illinois, we often call these heater cases, where there is immense pressure on police and prosecutors to arrest and convict somebody, anybody. Carve-outs also fail to account for degrees of culpability. There has recently been scrutiny over how unjust Illinois' accountability and felony murder laws are. Nevertheless, people continue to argue for carve-outs which ignore these levels of culpability or participation. They neglect the fact that hundreds, if not thousands of people who never committed a rape or murder are nonetheless convicted under such under the felony murder rule or theory of accountability. Carve-outs also fail to take into account structural racism in our criminal legal system. They ignore the following facts. 1, blacks and Latinos are more likely to have inadequate legal counsel due to income disparities. 2, racist prosecutors have unfettered charging abilities. And 3, society in general, including judges and jurors, are more likely to view blacks as guilty or permanently incorrigible just because of the color of their skin. All of which means that black people are more likely to be charged with more serious offenses than whites for the same acts, are less likely to have competent counsel capable of getting those charges reduced, are less likely to get a reduced charge or plea offer, are more likely to be convicted of a more serious offense, and are 3.5 times as likely to be wrongfully convicted of a sex offense. All of which helps explain why 68% of Illinoisans serving life without parole and de facto life sentences are black, even though they only make up 14% of the state's population. Carve-outs are thus one more racist extension of an already racist criminal legal system. Another extremely unjust carve-out in ameliorative legislation is the practice of writing it so that it is not applied retroactively. There is no one more deserving of the benefits of ameliorative legislation than those who are currently victims of the overly punitive laws in need of correcting. We have already seen how unjust the youthful offender parole bill was, not only in the categorical carve-outs and arbitrary age cap, but the non-retroactivity clause meant that people who should have benefited from it and been paroled were left to die in prison, some from COVID-19. Recently, in People v. Minifield, the Illinois Appellate Court noted the absurdity in the fact that that bill's passage means that two people convicted of committing the same crime on the same day could wind up having decades apart release dates simply because one was sentenced the day before or after the other, even if they were also sentenced to the same number of years in prison. Carve-outs also failed to account for the human potential for change. Contrary to political hyperbole, people are not born evil if they commit certain crimes, nor are they permanently incorrigible. In fact, those convicted of murders and or sex offenses are often the safest people to release because the risk that they will reoffend is lower than for people serving time for less serious crimes. Not surprisingly, studies unanimously show that lifers who obtain release from prison have near zero reoffense rate. Carve-outs neglect these facts and fail to account for lower recidivism risks in these same populations. The bottom line is this: politicians don't have crystal balls. Thus, they should not be making arbitrary decisions today about who may or may not still be a threat to public safety decades from now. Instead, they should allow for others, like those on the Prisoner Review Board, to weigh all relevant factors, on an individualized basis to see who the person has become years later. In summary, carve-outs are illogical. They are largely political theater and have real-world consequences, which we've increasingly seen with this pandemic can be deadly. What we do know for sure is that our current criminal legal system is severely unjust. That is why we are all here considering ameliorative legislation. Any carve-outs would be yet another unjust extension of an already unjust system. SB3233 should thus remain devoid of any carve-outs and be applied retroactively, because legislation cannot be written to account for the myriad factors noted earlier and would only result in more injustice if carve-outs are inserted. Thank you for your time and consideration.